In the 60s, his steady drumming powered the most famous band on earth. Fans screamed his name, his smile graced every magazine, and Ringo Starr seemed untouchable. But today, at 85, the former Beatle lives quietly in Los Angeles, his once boyish face weathered by time. How did the cheerful drummer of Beatlemania transform into this life now? Richard Starkey was born in 1940 in a humble part of Liverpool, England. Life from the start was far from easy. His father left when he was just 3, and his mother worked long hours as a barmaid to keep food on the table. Ringo, as he later became known, spent much of his childhood in hospitals, battling illnesses like peritonitis and tuberculosis. For months he lay in wards staring at ceilings, the sound of nurses' footsteps his only rhythm. Nobody could have guessed then that this frail child would one day provide the heartbeat for the biggest band in the world. Music arrived not as luxury, but as salvation. After recovering, young Richard discovered drumming in a local hospital band, and it changed everything. He was drawn not to the spotlight, but to the steady pulse at the back, the foundation upon which everything else could rest. By his teens, he was already known around Liverpool clubs as the kid with the steady hands, the one who could keep time without faltering. He joined a skiffle group called the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group, then graduated into Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, one of the hottest acts on the local circuit. Fans at the Cavern Club would chant his name, his shaggy hair, and easy grin, giving him an approachable charm. Meanwhile, another band was carving out their own sound, the Beatles. They were good, but their original drummer, Pete Best, lacked the punch they needed. In 1962, Destiny came calling. Ringo was invited to sit in with John, Paul, and George, and the chemistry was immediate. His playing was not flashy, but it was rock solid, quirky, and creative. He could shift rhythms with ease, making songs like Love Me Do and Please Please Me snap into place. Fans noticed too. Within weeks of him joining, the Beatles were transformed from a promising group into an unstoppable force. For teenagers in Britain, it felt like a new world was opening. Posters of the mop-top quartet covered bedroom walls. Girls screamed his name at train stations, and his rings and catchphrases made headlines in magazines like Melody Maker. Though Ringo was often seen as the everyman Beatle, that was part of the appeal. He was the one fans felt they could know, the one who seemed approachable while still standing on stages larger than life. He wasn't just a drummer, he became a personality. With his distinct nose, mischievous humor, and trademark phrases like A Hard Day's Night, Ringo turned into a pop culture fixture. Kids imitated his accent, and television shows replayed his interviews because his offbeat comments felt so genuine. He wasn't polished like Paul, or rebellious like John He was Ringo, and for many, that made him irreplaceable. By the mid-60s, he was starring in Beatles films such as A Hard Day's Night and Help, where critics and fans alike remarked on his natural screen presence. He could steal a scene just by raising an eyebrow or muttering a line in his dry Liverpool humor. His image became a paradox, the drummer who didn't seek the spotlight, yet often stole it. At the time, nobody could imagine how dramatically different his life now would appear. In the 60s, Ringo Starr was more than a drummer. He was part of a movement that changed music, fashion, and youth culture forever. His face was on lunchboxes, record sleeves, and movie posters. For millions, he was proof that even a sickly child from a working-class city could rise to global stardom. And yet, as history would later show, the same fame that elevated him would also shadow his future. The boy who once beat drums to escape illness would one day find himself fighting to escape the weight of being a Beatle. By 1964, the name Ringo Starr was known in every household from Liverpool to Los Angeles. The Beatles had stormed America, appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show to an audience of more than 70 million viewers. Among the millions of screaming teenagers pressed against black and white television screens, there was always one face that stood out. The drummer with the boyish grin, flashing rings on every finger, pounding out beats that seemed to electrify the air itself. Beatlemania wasn't just music, it was hysteria, it was movement, it was the soundtrack of an era, and Ringo was at the center of it. His drumming style was deceptively simple but essential. Songs like She Loves You, Can't Buy Me Love, and Later Come Together all carried his unique rhythmic stamp, steady, inventive, always in service of the song. Music magazines raved that he had the feel no one else could replicate. His slightly behind-the-beat groove became part of the Beatles' magic, giving even their most basic pop songs a swagger. In those years, the Beatles ruled the Billboard Hot 100 like emperors. Their records sold in the millions, their concerts sold out in minutes. From Shea Stadium in 1965, where 55,000 fans screamed so loud the band could barely hear themselves, to their movies playing in cinemas across America, Ringo was a constant presence. Girls swooned not only for Paul's charm or John's wit, but for Ringo's everyman warmth. He was, as People magazine later called him, the Beatle you could imagine bringing home for dinner. Ringo wasn't just hidden behind the drum kit, he occasionally stepped forward, singing late on tracks that became anthems in their own right. Yellow Submarine, with its sing-along chorus, became a children's favorite and a pop culture staple. His voice on With a Little Help from My Friends turned what could have been a quirky track into a generational anthem of friendship and trust. These songs reinforced his identity not only as the drummer, but as the heart of the band. His personality shone just as brightly. In press conferences, Ringo's dry one-liners became legendary. Asked if he was the best drummer in the world, John Lennon once quipped, "He's not even the best drummer in the Beatles," the joke fans still debate, but it never tarnished Ringo's reputation. If anything, it underscored his resilience. He didn't need to prove technical wizardry. He had something rarer, charm and consistency. The 1960s were a blur of flashing cameras, endless flights, luxury hotels, and the surreal realization that four young men from Liverpool had become the most famous people on the planet. For Ringo, who had once stared out hospital windows as a sickly child, the sight of stadiums filled with screaming fans was almost unimaginable. His life was transformed into an endless loop of recording, performing, filming, and appearing on magazine covers. He was part of the most influential band in history, even as the Beatles evolved musically, experimenting with psychedelic sounds on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, diving into introspection on the White Album, and closing their career with Abbey Road. Ringo remained the steady pulse. His drumming on A Day in the Life, Rain, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow Never Knows pushed rock drumming into new territory. Critics who once dismissed him as the lucky Beatle came to respect his subtle artistry. At the peak of Beatlemania, Ringo Starr wasn't just a drummer. He was an icon. His haircut was copied by boys in high schools across America. His jewelry and catchphrases became fads. Fans carried signs declaring Ringo for president. His image was everywhere, from lunchboxes to trading cards to cartoons. In many ways, he was the glue that made the Beatles feel human. And yet, within the frenzy, seeds of future struggles were already sprouting. The relentless schedule wore down the band, and the constant pressure of fame left Ringo and his bandmates searching for peace. While the world saw the smiling Beatle with rings sparkling under stage lights, privately he began to feel the weight of being trapped in a machine too big to stop. Looking back, it is almost surreal to think that someone who once commanded stadiums, television screens, and magazine covers could ever retreat into a quieter existence. During the 1960s, Ringo Starr seemed immortal, forever young, forever smiling behind the drum kit. But history would show that fame's peak often casts the darkest shadow over the years to come. When the Beatles officially split in 1970, the world mourned as though an era had been buried overnight. For Ringo Starr, the end of the band meant stepping out from the back of the stage and trying to prove himself alone. At first, things looked promising. His early solo singles like It Don't Come Easy and Photograph climbed the Billboard charts, giving fans hope that he could thrive without the Beatles brand. For a brief moment, it felt as if he might carve his own place in rock's future. But the 1970s quickly turned complicated. The magic of Beatlemania could not be replicated. And while Paul, John, and George found their footing with acclaimed albums and iconic hits, Ringo's career wavered. His music was fun, sometimes even charming, but critics were unkind. Rolling Stone magazine dismissed some of his records as lightweight, and sales began to slide. Fans who once screamed for him in stadiums weren't lining up for his solo tours. Worse, Ringo fell into the traps that had swallowed many rock stars of the era. Alcohol became a constant companion. Behind his easy smile, he struggled with addiction, and by the late 1970s and 1980s, it was more than just whispers. Stories of missed shows, erratic behavior, and an increasingly fragile image circulated in the press. For longtime fans, it felt like watching the cheerful drummer, the one who once made children laugh with Yellow Submarine, turn into someone harder, someone weighed down by demons. The cultural tide shifted too. The Beatles' breakup had left a hole in pop culture, but new waves of music, punk, disco, and later MTV-driven pop, moved the spotlight elsewhere. Ringo, once central to every conversation about music, began to feel like a relic of the past. His attempts at acting fizzled, with films like Caveman in 1981 failing to capture audiences. What had once felt natural, his humor and presence, now seemed out of place in Hollywood. By the mid-1980s, the decline was visible. Financial troubles loomed, his marriages faltered, and his drinking deepened. Friends worried, fans felt confused. How could the drummer who once held the rhythm for Come Together now appear so unsteady in his own life? It was as if a piece of their youth was unraveling in front of them. And then, almost suddenly, everything collapsed. By the end of the decade, Ringo was battling not just fading fame, but survival itself. The Beatle who had once seemed untouchable was adrift, his current life a mystery even to those who once followed him most closely. By the late 1980s, the drummer who once helped soundtrack the entire world seemed to disappear from it. The era of Ringo Starr as a chart-topping star had ended, and fans were left scratching their heads. Where had the friendly Beatle gone? How could a man whose face once beamed from every magazine rack suddenly slip from the spotlight so completely? The cracks had been widening for years. His battle with alcohol had reached a breaking point, and it was no longer a secret. Interviews grew scarce. Concert appearances dwindled. At a time when MTV was minting new superstars like Madonna and Michael Jackson, Ringo was nowhere to be seen. His attempts at comebacks albums like Old Wave in 1983 were barely noticed in the United States. Critics dismissed them, and fans barely realized they had been released at all. For the public, it was jarring. Just 2 decades earlier, Ringo Starr had been the smiling heart of the Beatles, singing with a little help from my friends to sold-out stadiums. Now he was a ghost in the music industry. When his name did appear in tabloids, it was rarely flattering rumors of personal struggles, failed projects, and a sense that he was drifting. For many fans, it felt like losing a thread that connected them to their youth. Even the Beatles' legacy cast a long shadow. Paul McCartney remained active and visible, filling arenas. George Harrison retreated but released critically acclaimed work. John Lennon's tragic death in 1980 left the world in mourning and cemented his legend. But Ringo, he seemed suspended between worlds, too famous to fade completely, yet too troubled to thrive. In 1988, he hit a wall. His drinking spiraled so far out of control that he and his wife, actress Barbara Bach, checked into rehab together. The headlines at the time were both shocking and strangely muted. Shocking because Ringo Starr was a Beatle. Muted because so many assumed he had already faded into the past. Rehab worked, but the damage to his public image was real. For nearly a decade, he had been missing from the cultural stage, a figure who once defined the 60s, now absent from the 90s. Fans whispered, asking the same question again and again, where did Ringo go? Some assumed he was living in quiet retirement. Others speculated he was broke or ill. The mystery deepened because unlike some celebrities who stayed in the tabloids, Ringo truly pulled away. His life, now compared to the frenzy of Beatlemania, was almost unrecognizable. The cameras no longer followed his every move. And for younger generations, his name was little more than a trivia answer, the Beatles drummer. For older fans, the silence was painful. Seeing their once vibrant hero disappear reminded them that time had moved on, that the soundtrack of their youth had quieted. They remembered the rings, the laugh, the steady beat that carried songs into history. And now, it seemed all of that had dissolved into shadows. By the early 1990s, the world had to accept that Ringo Starr, the drummer who once defined a generation, was gone from the spotlight. Whether by choice or by circumstance, he had vanished. His current life remained a mystery, a far cry from the chaos and glamour of his Beatles years. Today, at 85 years old, Ringo Starr lives a life that is almost surreal when placed beside the chaos of the 1960s. The man who once couldn't walk through an airport without being mobbed now enjoys something resembling peace. His home is in Los Angeles, a modern mansion tucked away in the hills, far from the Liverpool streets where his journey began. For decades, he has been happily married to Barbara Bach, the former Bond girl he met on the set of the comedy Caveman. They are one of the rare celebrity couples who endured, their bond surviving the struggles that once nearly broke them. Fans who see him today often remark on his appearance. Gone is the mop-topped, boyish drummer of Beatlemania. In his place is a thin, sharply dressed elder statesman of rock, with neatly trimmed hair, a beard, and ever-present sunglasses. He still flashes peace signs wherever he goes, a gesture that has become his personal trademark. At first glance, some fans hardly recognize him, and yet, when he smiles, the old Ringo is still there. The warmth that made him the approachable Beatle never fully faded. His career now is no longer about topping charts or breaking records, but about celebrating the music that made him. Since 1989, he has toured with his own rotating supergroup, Ringo Starr and his all-star band. The lineup changes, often featuring legends like Joe Walsh, Peter Frampton, or members of Toto, but the idea is always the same. Ringo at the center, drumming and singing hits, surrounded by friends. The shows don't sell out stadiums like the Beatles once did, but they fill theaters with thousands of fans, many of them reliving their youth for a night. The sound of "With a Little Help from My Friends" still brings crowds to tears. Financially, Ringo has done well. Despite career downturns, the Beatles' legacy has ensured that he remains wealthy. Royalties from one of the most valuable music catalogs in history continue to flow, and he has invested wisely in property. Unlike some of his contemporaries who ended up bankrupt, Ringo's life now is one of quiet stability. He has the means to live comfortably without needing to chase the charts that once defined him. Health, however, has been a constant theme in his life. From his childhood illnesses to later struggles with addiction, Ringo has never had an easy path. Yet in recent decades, sobriety and a focus on wellness have kept him remarkably youthful. He practices vegetarianism, promotes peace and love, and even maintains a fitness routine that surprises many for a man his age. While time has inevitably left its mark, Ringo Starr remains active, still touring, still recording occasional albums, and still spreading his message of positivity. Family is another anchor. He has 3 children, from his first marriage to Maureen Cox-Zach, Jason, and Lee All, of whom found their own paths in music and the arts. Zach Starkey, in particular, became a respected drummer in his own right, performing with The Who and Oasis. For Ringo, watching his son carry the drumming torch has been a source of quiet pride. There have been attempts at comebacks in the sense of mainstream relevance, but Ringo seems less interested in fame and more invested in connection. His albums in recent years, Give More Love in 2017, What's My Name in 2019, haven't dominated charts but have kept his voice alive. Fans treasure them, not for innovation, but for continuity. Hearing new songs from Ringo in the 21st century feels like a small miracle, a reminder that the story didn't end when the Beatles walked off the rooftop in 1969. And perhaps the most striking detail of his life now is how ordinary it is compared to what came before. He enjoys time with Barbara, promotes peace through interviews and appearances, and spends much of his days painting and working on art projects. For someone once chased by mobs of teenagers, the quiet rhythm of this later chapter is almost unimaginable. It's almost surreal to think that the man who once ruled the charts, graced every magazine cover, and seemed forever young now lives this quieter, steadier existence. Fans who stumble across recent photos often react with shock. That's Ringo. But alongside the surprise is admiration. After years of struggle, he has managed what many rock stars never achieve: survival, stability, and even serenity. Ringo Starr's current life is not about glory, but about endurance. He is proof that even icons can find peace after chaos. And for those who grew up with Beatles posters on their walls, seeing him still smiling, still flashing peace signs, is a reminder that while fame fades, the beat can go on. Do you remember the first time you heard Ringo Starr's drumming? Maybe it was the opening pulse of She Loves You or the rolling fills on A Day in the Life. For millions of fans, his steady beat was the soundtrack of their youth, played through transistor radios, echoing in high school gyms, blasting from car windows on summer nights. His rhythms were simple, but they were unforgettable. They carried a generation. Looking at Ringo's journey now, it's hard not to feel a mix of nostalgia and awe. From a sickly child in Liverpool, to the heartbeat of the biggest band in history, to years of addiction and near disappearance, and finally to a place of peace and stability, his story is one of survival. He may never have been the flashiest Beatle, but he is the one who endured. When we see him today, flashing peace signs at 85, still performing with his all-star band, we are reminded that fame may fade, but spirit remains. Behind the magazine covers and screaming crowds was always a man who simply loved rhythm, who found joy in music and who wanted to share it. His current life may be quieter, more private, but it is still deeply connected to the heartbeat he gave the world. For longtime fans, the contrast is striking. The boy with rings on every finger is now a grandfatherly figure in sunglasses. The drummer who once couldn't hear himself over the roar of Shea Stadium now plays theaters where audiences sing along rather than scream. And yet there's something profoundly moving in that. It shows us that life has chapters, chaotic ones, painful ones, and if we're lucky, peaceful ones. So what about you? Which part of Ringo Starr's journey shocked you the most about his current life? Was it the quiet resilience after years of struggle? Or the fact that he is still out there touring and smiling when so many of his contemporaries are gone? Share your thoughts and memories in the comments below. And as always, we want to know, who should we cover next? Which forgotten icon, which vanished star, whose current life are you curious to discover? For now, let's close on the image of Ringo, hands flashing peace signs, still drumming, still alive, still beating time. The world may have moved on, but his echo lingers, a reminder that the rhythm of the Beatles and the heart behind it will never truly fade.